I thought I knew what heartbreak looked like until my 5-year-old granddaughter, Emma, whispered those devastating words at my dinner table. When Jessica dropped her off for the weekend, claiming she needed time with her parents, I welcomed the chance to spoil my little angel. I prepared Emma's favorite spaghetti and meatballs, watching her tiny frame, sitting perfectly still in the chair. But instead of digging in like any normal child, she just stared at the steaming plate with those enormous brown eyes. When I gently asked why she wasn't eating, her response shattered my world completely. "Am I allowed to eat today?" she asked, and the tears that followed told me everything I needed to know about the hell this innocent baby had been living through. The silence that followed Emma's question hung in my Denver kitchen like a heavy blanket. I'm Alfreda, 70 years old, and I've seen plenty in my decades as a school principal before retirement. But nothing prepared me for the raw terror in my granddaughter's voice when she asked permission to eat food I'd lovingly prepared for her. My late husband George always said I had a sixth sense about troubled children. 3 years since his passing, I'd thrown myself into volunteer work, but nothing mattered more than family. My son Marcus worked the oil rigs in North Dakota, gone 2 weeks every month to support his wife Jessica and little Emma. He'd married Jessica 5 years ago, and I'd tried my best to welcome her into our family despite the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. Jessica had always painted herself as the overwhelmed single mother, constantly explaining how difficult Emma could be. During their brief visits, she'd shake her head sadly and talk about Emma's supposed behavioral problems, her eating issues, her defiance. I chalked it up to normal parenting struggles, the kind every mother faces. But sitting there, watching my granddaughter tremble over a plate of pasta, I realized how blind I'd been. "Sweetheart," I said, keeping my voice gentle, "of course you can eat. You never need permission to eat in Grandma Alfreda's house." Emma's eyes widened like I'd offered her the moon. She picked up her tiny fork with both hands as if the utensil might disappear if she didn't hold it tight enough. Every bite she took was careful, measured like she expected someone to snatch the plate away at any moment. That's when I noticed other things. How Emma apologized when she accidentally dropped her napkin. How she jumped when I opened a cabinet door too quickly. How she kept glancing toward the front door as if expecting someone to burst in and catch her doing something wrong. After dinner, while helping her change into pajamas for our sleepover, I made a discovery that turned my stomach. Under Emma's bed in the guest room, tucked behind her little pink suitcase, I found a collection of saltine crackers wrapped carefully in tissues. Some were stale, others broken into crumbs, but all hidden like precious treasure. "Emma, honey, what are these for?" I asked, pulling out one of the tissue bundles. Her face crumpled immediately. "I'm sorry, Grandma Alfreda. I know I'm not supposed to take food without asking. Please don't tell Mommy. I promise I'll be good." The pieces started falling into place like a nightmare puzzle. Jessica's constant complaints about Emma being difficult suddenly sounded different. Her insistence that Emma needed structured discipline consequences. The way Emma always seemed smaller each time I saw her, quieter, more withdrawn. My neighbor Dorothy knocked on the door the next morning while Emma was watching cartoons. Dorothy had been a pediatric nurse for 40 years before retirement, and her trained eye missed nothing. "Alfreda," she said quietly, glancing toward the living room where Emma sat with her knees pulled up to her chest. "That child has lost weight since I saw her last month. Look at her arms." I followed Dorothy's gaze and felt my heart sink. Emma's little arms did look thinner, her cheekbones more pronounced. How had I missed it? "Jessica says she's going through a picky eating phase," I whispered back. Dorothy's expression darkened. "Honey, I've seen picky eaters. This is something else entirely. That baby is scared. You can see it in how she holds herself, how she watches every door like she's planning an escape route." The weekend passed too quickly. Emma gradually relaxed enough to ask for seconds at breakfast, though she still looked shocked when I immediately said yes. She played with my old collection of ceramic angels, handling each one like it might break if she breathed too hard. When bedtime came, she asked if she was allowed to sleep in the bed or if she should sleep on the floor. That question kept me awake all night. What kind of home was my granddaughter living in? When Jessica arrived Sunday evening to pick up Emma, she immediately launched into her usual complaints. "I hope she wasn't too much trouble." Jessica sighed, running her hands through her perfectly styled blonde hair. "She's been so difficult lately. I think she's testing boundaries. You know how children can be." I watched Emma's shoulders hunch as she gathered her things. The confident little girl who'd played with my angels all weekend disappeared, replaced by a timid shadow who kept her eyes on the ground. "She was wonderful," I said firmly. "We had a lovely time." Jessica's smile seemed forced. "Oh, that's unusual. She must have been on her best behavior for Grandma. At home, she's constantly pushing limits. Just yesterday, I had to put her in timeout for 3 hours because she tried to get food from the refrigerator without permission." 3 hours. My stomach churned as I hugged Emma goodbye, feeling how tightly she clung to me. "Can I come back soon, Grandma Elfrida?" she whispered in my ear. "Anytime, sweetheart, anytime at all." After they left, I sat in my kitchen staring at Emma's empty chair. Dorothy's words echoed in my mind. That baby is scared. I thought about the hidden crackers, the constant apologies, the way Emma had asked permission to exist in every small way. For the first time in my 70 years, I wondered if I was watching a child being systematically broken, and I had no idea how to stop it. The phone rang at 6 in the morning 3 days later. Jessica's voice came through the receiver, high-pitched and frantic. "Elfrida, I'm so sorry to bother you this early, but I need help. Emma's acting out again, and I just don't know what to do. She's been having these episodes where she hoards food and refuses to eat at proper meal times. My mother thinks maybe you spoiled her too much over the weekend." I sat up in bed, instantly alert. "What do you mean hoarding food?" "Oh, it's this behavioral thing she does. She hides snacks in her room and then won't eat dinner. The pediatrician says it's a control issue. Some children develop eating disorders when they feel their world is chaotic. I've been trying to establish structure, but it's so hard when family members undermine the routine." The accusation hit like a slap. "Jessica, I fed her normal, healthy meals." "I know you meant well." Jessica continued, her tone dripping with condescending patience. "But Emma needs consistency. When she comes home talking about second helpings and snacks whenever she wants them, it confuses her about the rules." Dr. Crawford explained that children like Emma need very clear boundaries about food. Dr. Crawford. I made a mental note of the name. Over the next 2 weeks, Jessica's calls became more frequent. Each conversation followed the same pattern. Emma was acting out. Emma was being difficult. Emma needed more discipline. According to Jessica, my granddaughter was displaying concerning behaviors that required immediate intervention. "She's been having tantrums when I serve her meals," Jessica reported during one particularly dramatic phone call. "Yesterday, she threw herself on the floor crying because I gave her a perfectly normal portion of chicken and vegetables. The family therapist thinks she might have oppositional defiant disorder." Family therapist, another name to investigate. I decided to visit unannounced the following Thursday afternoon. Jessica's face went through several expressions when she opened the door, settling on a strained smile. "Elfrida, what a surprise. I wish you'd called first. Emma's having one of her difficult days." I could hear Emma's voice from the kitchen talking quietly to herself. When I walked in, I found her sitting at the table with a plate containing 3 baby carrots and a single slice of cheese. "Hi, Grandma Elfrida," Emma said softly, not touching her food. "That's her lunch," Jessica announced proudly. Dr. Crawford recommended smaller portions to help with her food obsession. Children with eating disorders need to learn that food isn't a reward or comfort mechanism. I stared at the pathetic portions. "She's 5 years old, Jessica. This wouldn't feed a bird." Jessica's expression hardened for just a moment before the concerned mother mask slipped back into place. "I know it seems small, but Emma specifically asked for less food. She's been very vocal about not being hungry. Haven't you, sweetheart?" Emma nodded quickly, too quickly. "I'm not hungry, Grandma Elfrida. Mommy says I had too much breakfast." Breakfast. I glanced at the clock. It was 2:30 in the afternoon. "What did you have for breakfast?" I asked Emma directly. Jessica jumped in before Emma could answer. She had oatmeal, a full bowl, but she only ate half because she said it was too much. That's part of her eating disorder behavior pattern. I spent the next hour watching Jessica orchestrate a masterful performance. Every question I asked was deflected with psychological jargon and references to medical professionals. Every concern I raised was reframed as evidence of Emma's problematic relationship with food. The therapist says family members often enable eating disorder behaviors without realizing it. Jessica explained when I suggested Emma might actually be hungry. When we give in to their demands for more food or different food, we're reinforcing the obsessive patterns. I asked to see Emma's bedroom and discovered it had been stripped bare except for a bed and a small dresser. No toys, no books, no personal belongings of any kind. "We're implementing a minimalist approach," Jessica said when she caught me looking around the empty space. Dr. Crawford explained that children with behavioral issues often become overstimulated by too many possessions. Emma's been much calmer since we simplified her environment. Calmer. The word stuck in my throat as I watched Emma sit motionless on her bed, hands folded in her lap like a trained dog waiting for commands. That evening, Jessica's mother, Patricia, called me. I'd met her briefly at Marcus and Jessica's wedding, a thin woman with sharp features and an even sharper tongue. "I hear you've been questioning Jessica's parenting decisions," Patricia said without preamble. "I think you need to understand that Emma is not a normal child. She requires special handling." "What exactly do you mean by special handling?" "The child manipulates adults with her sad little act. Jessica's been too soft on her, if you ask me. When I was raising my children, we didn't tolerate the kind of behavior Emma displays. A firm hand and strict discipline are exactly what she needs." I listened to Patricia describe Emma as manipulative attention-seeking and deliberately defiant. According to her, my granddaughter was a master manipulator who used tears and apparent fear to get her way with soft-hearted relatives. "Jessica's doing the hard work of breaking those patterns," Patricia continued. "It's thankless, but someone has to teach that child proper behavior. You're not helping by questioning her methods." After hanging up, I sat in my living room feeling like I was losing my mind. Was I seeing problems where none existed? Was Emma really just a troubled child who needed more structure? But then I remembered the hidden crackers. The way Emma had asked permission to sleep in a bed. The genuine surprise on her face when I'd offered her seconds at dinner. I decided to do something I'd never done before. I called Marcus at work. "Mom, is everything okay?" His voice was concerned. Marcus rarely heard from me during his work rotations unless there was an emergency. "I'm worried about Emma," I said carefully. "What do you mean Jessica says she's been doing better lately? The new treatment plan seems to be working." "Treatment plan?" My heart sank. "Marcus, what treatment plan?" "For her eating disorder. Jessica found this great doctor who specializes in childhood behavioral issues. He's got Emma on a structured feeding schedule and a simplified environment to reduce her anxiety triggers." I closed my eyes. Jessica had gotten to Marcus first, framing every concern as part of Emma's supposed medical condition. "When you're home, do you eat meals with Emma?" "Sometimes. But Jessica handles most of the food stuff because she knows Emma's triggers better than I do. The doctor said it's important for her primary caregiver to control the feeding schedule." We talked for another 10 minutes and it became clear that Jessica had created an elaborate narrative where she was the devoted mother struggling with a difficult child who had serious psychological problems. Marcus had been working so much that he'd missed the gradual implementation of what Jessica called therapeutic interventions. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to start documenting what I was seeing. If Emma was really struggling with behavioral issues, I needed to understand them better. And if something else was happening, I needed proof. I had no idea that within 24 hours, I would discover the true scope of Jessica's deception and the horrifying financial motive behind my granddaughter's suffering. The breakthrough came from the most unexpected source. While cleaning out my late husband's desk, I found his old address book and decided to call our family attorney, thinking I should update my will to include provisions for Emma's education. When I mentioned my concerns about my granddaughter's supposed eating disorder, Sarah Chen, my attorney, asked a question that changed everything. "Alfreda, has anyone mentioned disability benefits in connection with Emma's diagnosis?" The question caught me off guard. Disability benefits. She's 5 years old. Children can qualify for supplemental security income if they have documented disabilities that substantially limit their daily activities. It's not uncommon, but the application process requires extensive medical documentation. Something cold settled in my stomach. How much money are we talking about? It varies, but it can be several $100s per month, sometimes more, depending on the circumstances and additional state benefits. I thanked Sarah and hung up, my mind racing. That evening, I did something I hadn't done since my school principal days, when I suspected parents of falsifying records. I drove to the public library and used their computer to research disability fraud cases. What I found made me physically ill. Parents who coached children to fake symptoms. Doctors who provided false diagnoses in exchange for kickbacks. Elaborate schemes where children were systematically abused to create genuine psychological symptoms that would qualify for benefits. The articles described a hidden world where children became profit centers for unscrupulous adults. I spent 3 hours reading case studies, and by the time I left the library, I had a terrible suspicion about what was happening to Emma. The next morning, I called Dr. Benjamin Crawford's office, claiming to be a grandmother seeking a consultation about childhood eating disorders. The receptionist was helpful, explaining that Dr. Crawford specialized in severe behavioral cases and had extensive experience with disability evaluations. "Many of our patients qualify for supplemental support services," she explained cheerfully. "Dr. Crawford is very thorough in his assessments and documentation." I made an appointment for the following week under a false name, claiming I was researching treatment options for a relative's child. When the day arrived, I sat in Dr. Crawford's waiting room observing his practice. The office was filled with children who looked remarkably similar to Emma, thin, withdrawn, sitting quietly beside parents who spoke about them in clinical terms. Dr. Crawford himself was exactly what I'd expected: a middle-aged man with expensive clothes and a practiced smile who spoke about children like they were case studies rather than human beings. "Childhood eating disorders often present with comorbid behavioral symptoms," he explained during our consultation. "Oppositional defiance, attention-seeking behaviors, emotional dysregulation. These children require intensive therapeutic intervention and often qualify for additional support services to help families manage the financial burden of treatment." When I asked about his success rate with disability applications, his smile widened. "I have an excellent relationship with the evaluation teams. My documentation is always thorough and evidence-based. Families rarely have trouble securing the benefits their children need." I left his office feeling sick to my stomach. Everything about Dr. Crawford screamed fraud, from his expensive office furniture to the way he discussed children as revenue streams rather than patients. But I needed more evidence. That evening, I did something that went against every moral principle I'd held for 70 years. I called Jessica and lied. "I've been thinking about what you said regarding Emma's treatment," I told her. "I want to help financially. These medical expenses must be overwhelming." Jessica's response was immediate and telling. "Oh, Alfreda, that's so generous of you. Actually, we've been fortunate. Emma qualified for some assistance programs that help cover her therapeutic needs. Dr. Crawford was wonderful about making sure we had all the proper documentation." Assistance programs. Government support for children with special needs. It's been a blessing, really. Between the monthly payments and the medical coverage, we can afford the intensive treatment Emma requires. My heart pounded as I pressed for details. Jessica was remarkably forthcoming, proud even about navigating what she called the complex world of childhood disability services. "The key is having the right medical documentation," she continued. "Dr. Crawford knew exactly what the evaluators needed to see. He's worked with many families like ours." After ending the call, I sat in my kitchen staring at the phone. Jessica was collecting disability payments by claiming Emma had severe behavioral disorders. But Emma didn't have behavioral disorders. She had been systematically trained to act afraid, withdrawn, and abnormal through psychological abuse. I spent the weekend researching Jessica's background, something I should have done years ago when Marcus first brought her home. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Jessica had been married twice before meeting my son. In both previous relationships, she'd been involved with men who had young children from previous marriages. In both cases, those children had been removed from the homes due to allegations of abuse and neglect. The pattern was becoming clear. Jessica targeted single fathers with young children, established herself as a devoted stepmother, then began a systematic campaign of psychological abuse designed to create genuine trauma symptoms that would qualify for disability benefits. But the most horrifying discovery came when I found Jessica's social media accounts. While she was feeding Emma tiny portions and claiming the child had eating disorders, Jessica was posting pictures of elaborate meals she prepared for herself and friends. Restaurant visits, wine tastings, expensive shopping trips, all funded by what she called her consulting work. Consulting work. I realized she was probably using code words for her disability fraud income. My investigation took a darker turn when I discovered Jessica had recently been researching residential treatment facilities for children with severe behavioral problems. The websites she'd visited specialized in long-term institutional care for children whose families could no longer manage their complex needs. The plan was becoming clear. Jessica intended to have Emma declared so severely disturbed that institutional care became necessary. She would maintain legal guardianship and continue collecting benefits while Emma disappeared into the system. But I'd underestimated how far Jessica was willing to go to protect her scheme. The very next day, Emma arrived at my house for an unscheduled visit, and I discovered Jessica had begun medicating her. The little girl who stumbled through my front door was barely recognizable. Her eyes were glassy, her movements sluggish, and she could barely stay awake during our conversation. "Emma, sweetheart, are you feeling all right?" I asked, helping her to the couch. "Mommy gave me my new medicine," Emma slurred. "It makes the sad thoughts go away, but it makes me sleepy too." I checked Emma's backpack and found a prescription bottle labeled with psychiatric medication. The dosage was for an adult, not a 5-year-old child. That's when I realized I was no longer just witnessing child abuse. I was watching someone slowly poison my granddaughter to create symptoms that would justify even more invasive treatments and higher disability payments. The time for investigation had ended. It was time to fight back. That night, watching Emma sleep off the effects of medication that should never have been given to a child, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. For 70 years, I'd believed in working within systems, trusting authorities, giving people the benefit of the doubt. But sitting beside my drugged granddaughter's bed, I realized that sometimes good people have to become warriors. I called my neighbor Dorothy at 6 in the morning. "I need your help," I said, without preamble when she answered. "Emma's being systematically abused and I need medical documentation to prove it." Dorothy arrived within the hour carrying a bag of pediatric assessment tools she'd somehow acquired during her 40-year nursing career. What she found during her examination of Emma made both of us cry. Emma was 12 pounds underweight for her age and height. She had signs of chronic malnutrition, brittle hair, delayed healing of minor cuts, and muscle weakness. More damaging were the psychological symptoms: hypervigilance, exaggerated startle responses, and dissociative episodes where she would simply zone out when asked direct questions. "This child has been subjected to systematic psychological torture," Dorothy said bluntly, photographing Emma's physical condition with a professional camera. "Someone has deliberately created trauma responses in her." While Emma napped that afternoon, I made a phone call that would change the trajectory of our battle. I called Sarah Chen and explained everything I'd discovered. Alfreda. Sarah said after I'd finished my account, "What you're describing is a complex criminal enterprise involving medical fraud, child abuse, and conspiracy. You need more than concerns and observations. You need ironclad evidence." Sarah explained that taking down Jessica's operation would require documenting not just the abuse, but the financial fraud that motivated it. We needed to prove Jessica was intentionally harming Emma to collect disability benefits, and we needed evidence that would stand up in both criminal and family court. The good news is that if you're right about Dr. Crawford's involvement, there are probably other victims. Medical fraud cases often uncover multiple families. Over the following week, I learned to become someone I'd never been a covert investigator. Sarah connected me with a private investigator named Thomas Banks, who specialized in child abuse cases. Thomas taught me how to document evidence properly, how to record conversations legally, and most importantly, how to protect Emma while gathering proof. The hardest part will be maintaining normal relationships with the perpetrators. Thomas warned me, you have to act like the concerned but cooperative grandmother while secretly building a case against them. I installed a security camera system in my house hidden devices that would capture any abuse that occurred during Emma's visits. I purchased a small recording device that looked like a hearing aid, allowing me to document Jessica's conversations without arousing suspicion. Most importantly, I began reaching out to other families who'd been patients of Dr. Crawford. What I discovered made Jessica's scheme look like part of a much larger operation. Dr. Crawford had been providing false diagnoses for dozens of children over the past 5 years. Many of these children had been removed from their families when teachers or relatives reported abuse, but the cases had been dismissed because the children displayed genuine psychological symptoms that supported the parents' claims of behavioral disorders. The breakthrough came when I connected with Linda Walsh, a mother whose 8-year-old son had been one of Dr. Crawford's patients 2 years earlier. Linda had fought a desperate legal battle to regain custody of her child after her ex-husband and his new wife had convinced authorities that the boy needed institutional care. They nearly destroyed my son. Linda told me during a clandestine meeting at a coffee shop across town. By the time I got him back, he'd been so traumatized that he really did need therapy, but not for the reasons they claimed. Linda had spent her life savings proving that her ex-husband's new wife had been coaching her son to display symptoms of severe behavioral disorders while collecting disability benefits. The scheme had only been exposed when the boy accidentally told his teacher about the daily rehearsals where he practiced acting out for doctor visits. Dr. Crawford lost his license temporarily, but he got it reinstated 6 months later, Linda explained. The medical board said there was insufficient evidence of deliberate fraud. Through Linda, I met 2 other families who'd been victimized by similar schemes. In each case, the pattern was identical. A step-parent or guardian systematically abused children to create genuine trauma symptoms, then used those symptoms to obtain disability benefits and justify increasingly invasive treatments. The system is set up to protect children from obvious physical abuse, Thomas explained during one of our planning sessions, but psychological abuse that's designed to look like mental health treatment is much harder to detect and prosecute. The most chilling discovery came when I learned that Jessica had been in contact with a residential facility in another state. The Willowbrook Institute for Troubled Youth specialized in long-term care for children with severe behavioral problems. Their website described a locked facility where children received intensive therapy for complex psychological disorders. I called Willowbrook pretending to be a grandmother researching options for a troubled grandchild. The intake coordinator was disturbingly enthusiastic about their services. We work with many families where traditional outpatient therapy hasn't been effective, she explained. Our residential program is designed for children who require 24-hour therapeutic supervision. When I asked about the cost, she mentioned that most families use disability benefits and state funding to cover expenses. Many of our residents come to us through Dr. Crawford's referral network. He's excellent at identifying children who need our level of intervention. I realized Jessica was planning to have Emma committed to this facility probably within the next few months. Once Emma was institutionalized, Jessica could collect benefits indefinitely, while appearing to be the devoted mother making the ultimate sacrifice for her troubled child. But Jessica had made one critical mistake. She'd underestimated the protective instincts of a grandmother who'd spent 30 years dealing with troubled children and had no intention of letting anyone harm her granddaughter. The final piece of my evidence gathering came when Emma visited me the following weekend. I'd learned to hide my recording device in a teddy bear that Emma always carried during her stays. What that device captured during Jessica's pickup call would provide the smoking gun I needed to destroy her completely. As Emma played quietly in the living room, Jessica stood in my kitchen complaining about the burden of caring for such a difficult child. "I don't know how much more I can take," Jessica sighed dramatically. "The doctors are saying Emma might need residential treatment soon. It breaks my heart, but I have to think about what's best for her." I made sympathetic noises while my hidden recorder captured every word. "At least the disability payments help with expenses," Jessica continued. "Dr. Crawford says we might qualify for additional support if Emma's condition worsens. Sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is admit they can't handle their child's needs alone." That recording would prove Jessica's financial motivation for wanting Emma institutionalized. But I needed more. I needed evidence of the active abuse. I got it 3 days later when Marcus called from North Dakota. "Mom, something terrible happened. I came home early from my rotation and found Jessica forcing Emma to take medication. Emma was begging her to stop saying it made her sick." My son's voice broke as he described what he'd witnessed. Jessica holding Emma down while forcing pills into her mouth. Emma vomiting from the medication. Jessica screaming that Emma needed to take her medicine if she wanted to get better. "I don't understand what's happening," Marcus continued. "Jessica says Emma's been having violent episodes and needs stronger medication. But the kid I saw didn't look violent. She looked terrified." The trap was finally ready to spring. I had medical evidence of abuse, financial evidence of fraud, and now an eyewitness account from Emma's own father. Most importantly, I had allies in place to protect Emma when Jessica inevitably tried to flee or escalate her abuse. What I didn't expect was how quickly Jessica would make her move. Within 24 hours of Marcus's confrontation, she would attempt something so desperate and dangerous that it would expose the full scope of her criminal enterprise to law enforcement agencies across 3 states. Marcus's phone call changed everything. For the first time since this nightmare began, I had an ally who'd witnessed Jessica's abuse firsthand, but I also knew that confronting her directly had put Emma in immediate danger. "Marcus," I said carefully, "I need you to listen to me very closely. Emma is not mentally ill. She's being systematically abused to fake symptoms for disability fraud." The silence on the other end of the phone stretched for nearly a minute. "Mom, that's a serious accusation. I have evidence, medical documentation, financial records, recordings of Jessica discussing the scheme. But right now, Emma is in danger. Jessica knows you've seen too much." I spent the next 2 hours on the phone with my son, walking him through everything I'd discovered. Marcus was a good man, but he'd been working brutal schedules for months, trusting his wife to manage their home life. The scope of Jessica's deception was overwhelming for him to process. "I don't understand how I missed this," he kept saying. "How did I not see what was happening to my own daughters?" "Because Jessica is a professional," I told him. "She's done this before with other families. You were manipulated just as much as Emma was." The next morning, I received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Angela Foster, the pediatrician Dorothy had recommended, arrived at my door with a concerned expression. "Mrs. Elfrida, your neighbor Dorothy, asked me to stop by. She mentioned concerns about your granddaughter's medical care." Dr. Foster was everything Dr. Crawford wasn't warm, genuinely concerned about child welfare, and immediately suspicious when I described Emma's supposed treatment plan. Antipsychotic medication for a 5-year-old with eating issues. Dr. Foster's eyebrows shot up. "That's not just inappropriate, it's dangerous. Those medications can cause permanent developmental damage in young children." I showed Dr. Foster the photographs Dorothy had taken of Emma, along with the medication bottles I'd found in Emma's backpack. Her professional assessment was damning. "This child shows classic signs of systematic psychological abuse designed to create trauma responses. The medication doses are completely inappropriate, and could cause serious harm. Dr. Foster agreed to examine Emma officially and provide medical testimony if needed. More importantly, she helped me understand the long-term damage Jessica's abuse could cause. Children who experience this type of systematic psychological manipulation often struggle with trust and self-worth for years, she explained. The sooner we can intervene, the better Emma's chances for complete recovery. That afternoon, Thomas Banks called with disturbing news from his investigation into Jessica's background. "I found her previous victims," he said grimly. 2 children from her past relationships were removed from their homes and placed in psychiatric facilities. Both families lost custody permanently when the children were declared too disturbed to remain in family settings. The pattern was even more horrific than I'd imagined. Jessica didn't just abuse children for disability payments, she destroyed them so completely that they could never testify against her. "There's more," Thomas continued. "Jessica's working with a network. Dr. Crawford is just one piece. There's a whole system of corrupt professionals who process these cases." He'd uncovered evidence of a conspiracy involving falsified medical records kickbacks to facility administrators and even judges who'd been influenced to rule in favor of institutional placements. Jessica was part of an organized criminal enterprise that treated children as commodities. The good news is that federal agencies have been investigating this network for months. Your evidence could be the key to bringing down the entire operation. That evening, I made one of the hardest decisions of my life. I called Jessica and invited her and Emma to dinner the following Sunday. "I've been thinking about what you said regarding Emma's need for more intensive treatment." I lied smoothly. "I want to help however I can. Maybe we should discuss residential options together." Jessica's enthusiasm was immediate and chilling. "Oh, Elfrida, I'm so relieved you understand. It's been so difficult making these decisions alone. Dr. Crawford mentioned a wonderful facility that specializes in cases like Emma's." We spent 20 minutes discussing Willowbrook Institute while I secretly recorded every word. Jessica described the facility like it was a vacation resort rather than a prison for troubled children. "They have a structured program that helps children learn to manage their behavioral issues," she explained. "Emma would get round-the-clock therapeutic support, and honestly, it might be a relief for Marcus and me to focus on our marriage without the constant stress of managing Emma's episodes." Episodes. I wanted to scream that there were no episodes that Emma was a normal little girl who'd been tortured into acting disturbed. Instead, I made supportive noises and agreed that residential treatment sounded like the best option for everyone involved. After hanging up, I immediately called Thomas Banks. "She's accelerating the timeline," I told him. "I think she's planning to have Emma committed within the next few weeks." "That matches what I'm hearing from my federal contacts," Thomas replied. "There's been chatter about several high-profile placements coming up. Jessica might be trying to cash out before the investigation goes public." The next few days were a masterclass in deception. I maintained my facade as the concerned but supportive grandmother while secretly coordinating with law enforcement, medical professionals, and child welfare advocates. Every conversation with Jessica was recorded. Every interaction with Emma was documented. Most challenging was watching Emma during her visits while pretending everything was normal. The medication was clearly affecting her cognitive development. She struggled to complete simple puzzles that had been easy for her just weeks earlier. Her appetite had disappeared almost completely, and she often forgot conversations we'd had just minutes before. "Grandma Elfrida," she asked during one particularly heartbreaking moment, "why do I feel sick all the time?" "I don't know, sweetheart," I said, holding back tears, "but I promise you're going to feel better very soon." What Emma didn't know was that her ordeal was almost over. While she napped on my couch, I was coordinating with agencies across 3 states to ensure Jessica's entire network would be dismantled simultaneously. The breakthrough came when Linda Walsh called with urgent news. "Dr. Crawford just scheduled emergency evaluations for 6 children this week," she reported. "My contact at Child Protective Services thinks they're rushing placements before some kind of federal action." Emma was scheduled for her final evaluation on Friday. If everything went according to Jessica's plan, my granddaughter would be in a locked facility by the following Monday, beginning what was intended to be years of institutional abuse. But Jessica had made one fatal error in her planning. She'd assumed that a 70-year-old retired school principal would be easy to fool and impossible to stop. She was about to discover exactly how wrong she'd been. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October air that usually filled me with optimism. Instead, I woke with my stomach in knots, knowing that this was the day everything would come to a head. Emma's final evaluation with Dr. Crawford was scheduled for 11, and Jessica planned to drive directly from his office to Willowbrook Institute for what she called an immediate therapeutic intervention. I'd spent most of Thursday night on the phone with Thomas Banks and federal investigators coordinating the timing of what they called a multi-jurisdictional takedown. If everything went according to plan, Jessica would never make it to Willowbrook. At 8:30, my doorbell rang. Emma stood on my porch looking smaller than ever, clutching the teddy bear that contained my recording device. Jessica waited in the car with the engine running. "I'll pick her up around noon," Jessica called through her window. "The appointment might run long, and then we're driving straight to the new facility. Emma's finally going to get the help she needs." I hugged Emma close, whispering in her ear, "Remember what Grandma Alfreda told you, sweetheart. No matter what happens today, you're safe. I promise." Emma nodded solemnly. At 5 years old, she couldn't understand the complex legal and criminal proceedings that were about to unfold, but somehow she seemed to sense that her nightmare was finally ending. What happened next unfolded like a carefully choreographed operation that had been months in the planning. At 9:15, federal agents executed simultaneous search warrants at Dr. Crawford's office, Jessica's home, and Willowbrook Institute. The evidence they seized included falsified medical records, financial documents showing kickback payments, and communications between conspirators across multiple states. At 9:45, Child Protective Services arrived at Dr. Crawford's office with an emergency custody order removing Emma from Jessica's care. The timing was crucial. Jessica was already in the building, and Emma was in the secure waiting room when authorities arrived. I was sitting in my living room when Thomas Banks called with updates. "We've got her," he said simply. Jessica was arrested at Crawford's office attempting to sign commitment papers for Emma. The child is safe. But the day's revelations were just beginning. As federal agents processed evidence from the searches, the true scope of the criminal enterprise became clear. Dr. Crawford had been falsifying diagnoses for over 200 children across 5 states. The disability fraud alone amounted to millions of dollars annually. But more horrific were the discoveries at Willowbrook Institute. It wasn't a treatment facility, Thomas explained during a later phone call. It was essentially a prison where children were heavily medicated to keep them compliant while their guardians collected benefits. Some of those kids had been there for years. The facility administrators had been deliberately keeping children sick and traumatized to justify their institutional placement. Medical records showed children being given inappropriate medications, denied proper nutrition, and subjected to isolation punishment that amounted to psychological torture. Emma was scheduled to disappear into that system, Thomas continued. Once children were placed at Willowbrook, their families rarely visited. Many of the kids had no contact with the outside world for months at a time. The arrests continued throughout the day. Jessica's mother, Patricia, was taken into custody for conspiracy and fraud. Ryan, Jessica's boyfriend, who I'd only learned about during the investigation, was arrested for drug trafficking when agents found that he'd been supplying the psychiatric medications used to sedate children. But the most satisfying moment came when I received a call from Marcus. "Mom, I'm driving home with Emma right now. She's asking if she can have ice cream for lunch." I started crying right there in my kitchen. "Tell her she can have ice cream for breakfast, lunch, and dinner if she wants." When they arrived at my house 2 hours later, Emma ran straight into my arms with an energy I hadn't seen from her in months. The medication was beginning to wear off, and my real granddaughter was starting to emerge from the fog Jessica had created. Grandma Alfreda. Emma said, looking up at me with clear, bright eyes. Mommy Jessica got in trouble for being mean to me. The nice police lady said I don't have to take the sick medicine anymore. That evening, our family gathered in my living room for the first honest conversation we'd had in years. Marcus was devastated by how thoroughly he'd been deceived, but also relieved to finally understand why his daughter had seemed to be disappearing before his eyes. I kept telling myself that Jessica knew more about children than I did, he said, holding Emma on his lap while she ate her third bowl of soup. Every time I questioned something, she had medical explanations that sounded reasonable. Emma fell asleep in her father's arms while we talked, her breathing finally deep and peaceful. For the first time in months, she wasn't afraid to close her eyes. Over the following days, the media coverage was extensive. The story of a systematic child abuse network disguised as medical treatment captured national attention. Families across the country began questioning whether their own children's diagnoses and treatments were legitimate. Dr. Crawford's medical license was permanently revoked, and he faced federal charges for fraud conspiracy and child endangerment. The evidence against him was overwhelming: falsified records, financial kickbacks, and testimony from dozens of families whose children had been victimized. Jessica's case was even more damning. Investigators found detailed notes in her home describing her methods for psychologically breaking children, along with financial records showing the disability payments she'd collected for multiple victims over the years. She had a whole system, Thomas explained. Target single fathers with young children, establish herself as the devoted stepmother, then gradually implement abuse disguised as treatment. She'd done this successfully for almost a decade. The residential facilities that had been part of the network were shut down permanently. Children who'd been inappropriately placed were returned to their families or moved to legitimate therapeutic settings. The recovery process would take years, but at least the abuse had stopped. Most importantly, Emma was finally safe. But her healing journey was just beginning, and I was determined to be part of every step. 6 months later, I stood in a federal courthouse watching Jessica receive a sentence of 15 years in prison for child abuse, disability fraud, and conspiracy. She showed no remorse during the proceedings, maintaining that she'd been trying to help troubled children access necessary services. Judge Patricia Morrison wasn't impressed by Jessica's defense. You systematically tortured children to create symptoms that would justify stealing government benefits intended to help genuinely disabled families, the judge stated. Your actions represent a particularly heinous form of abuse because you use the medical system itself as a weapon against vulnerable children. Dr. Crawford received a 12-year sentence and permanent prohibition from practicing medicine. Ryan was sentenced to 8 years for drug trafficking and child endangerment. Patricia, who'd been peripherally involved in the financial fraud, received 3 years probation and community service. The restitution orders ensured that all fraudulent disability payments would be returned to federal programs with additional funds directed toward treatment for the children who'd been victimized. Emma would have access to specialized therapy for as long as needed, all funded by Jessica's seized assets. But the most meaningful justice was watching Emma transform back into the joyful, confident child she was meant to be. Dr. Angela Foster became Emma's primary pediatrician, monitoring her recovery from the psychological and physical damage Jessica had inflicted. The medication withdrawal had been difficult, but Emma's natural resilience shone through as her system cleared. Children are remarkably adaptive, Dr. Foster explained during one of Emma's checkups. With proper support and consistent love, Emma should make a complete recovery. The most important thing is maintaining stability and reassurance. Marcus had taken family leave from his oil rig job to focus on rebuilding his relationship with his daughter. Watching them together now, you'd never guess they'd been strangers just months before. I'm learning that being a present father is more important than making money, Marcus told me one afternoon while we watched Emma play in my backyard. I never want her to question whether she's loved and protected. Emma's transformation was remarkable. Within weeks of Jessica's arrest, she'd gained 8 pounds and grown 2 inches. Her hair became shiny and thick again. Most importantly, her personality blossomed in ways I'd never seen before. She laughed, constantly asked endless questions about everything, and developed an insatiable curiosity about the world around her. The timid child who'd asked permission to exist had become a confident little girl who announced her opinions and preferences with delightful certainty. Grandma Elfrida. She declared one morning over breakfast, "I want pancakes with strawberries and whipped cream, and I want to eat them outside so the birds can watch me." Those kinds of statements filled my heart every single day. The therapy process was intensive but positive. Dr. Catherine Brooks, Emma's trauma specialist, helped her process what had happened while teaching her healthy ways to express emotions and needs. "Emma understands that the abuse wasn't her fault," Dr. Brooks explained after a particularly successful session. "She's developing strong self-advocacy skills and learning to trust her own perceptions again." One of the most healing aspects of Emma's recovery was connecting with other children who'd been victimized by the same network. Linda Walsh's son, who was now 10 and thriving, became like a big brother to Emma. He helps her understand that healing is possible. Linda told me during one of our regular coffee meetings. Seeing him happy and confident gives her hope for her own future. The broader impact of exposing the abuse network continued to unfold. Federal legislation was introduced requiring stricter oversight of pediatric psychiatric medications and mandatory second opinions for childhood disability diagnoses. The Willowbrook Institute case became a model for identifying and prosecuting institutional abuse. Your willingness to investigate and document what you were seeing saved not just Emma, but probably dozens of other children, Thomas Banks told me during his final report. This network would have continued operating for years if you hadn't taken action. I'd also discovered a new purpose in my retirement. Sarah Chen and I established a legal advocacy program for families fighting fraudulent disability cases. We provided resources and support for relatives who suspected children were being abused under the guise of medical treatment. Too many people assume that medical professionals are always acting in children's best interests, Sarah explained. Your case proves that family members need to trust their instincts and demand accountability. Our advocacy work connected us with families across the country dealing with similar situations. Many had struggled for years to challenge diagnoses and treatments that seemed wrong, but had been unable to navigate the complex medical and legal systems. Dorothy became our volunteer medical consultant, using her nursing background to help families document concerns about children's care. Her professional expertise gave credibility to worried relatives who'd been dismissed as interfering or uninformed. "Children can't advocate for themselves," Dorothy often said. "If the adults in their lives don't speak up, who will?" Marcus eventually returned to work, but with a completely different arrangement that allowed him to be home every other week instead of monthly. Emma accompanied him when he traveled locally, and she loved visiting the oil sites where her daddy worked. "I want to be an engineer like Daddy," she announced proudly during a career day presentation at her new school. "But I also want to help other kids who are scared like Grandma Elfrida helped me." Emma's school experience was another victory. Her teachers were amazed by her intelligence and creativity characteristics that had been suppressed during Jessica's systematic abuse. She excelled academically and socially, making friends easily and participating enthusiastically in activities. The nightmares and anxiety that had plagued Emma during her abuse gradually faded. She slept peacefully through the night, ate with normal childhood enthusiasm, and approached new experiences with curiosity rather than fear. On the first anniversary of Jessica's arrest, Emma asked if she could visit the courthouse where the trial had taken place. "I want to see where the mean people got in trouble for hurting kids," she explained with 5-year-old logic. We made it a celebration instead, visiting the park across from the courthouse, where Emma fed ducks and played on swings, while telling me about her plans to become a doctor who helps children feel better. "Not the kind of doctor that gives sick medicine," she clarified seriously, "the kind that makes kids healthy and happy." As I watched Emma run and laugh with the pure joy of a child who finally felt safe, I reflected on everything we'd been through. The investigation had been exhausting and heartbreaking, but it had also shown me the incredible resilience of children and the power of family love. The experience taught me that sometimes the most important battles are fought quietly, one decision at a time, by ordinary people who refuse to look away when children are suffering. I'd learned that evil often hides behind professional credentials and institutional authority, but it can't withstand the determined love of family members who refuse to give up. Most importantly, I'd learned that healing is always possible when children are surrounded by people who believe in their worth and potential. Emma was now 6 years old, healthy, happy, and thriving. She had no memory of asking permission to eat or apologizing for existing. Instead, she approached each day with confidence and enthusiasm, secure in the knowledge that she was loved unconditionally. Looking back, I realized that night when Emma asked if she was allowed to eat dinner was both the worst and best moment of my life. Worst because it revealed the depth of her suffering, but best because it started the journey that saved her life and gave our family a future filled with hope. As I finish telling you this story, Emma is outside my kitchen window teaching her new puppy to fetch, while Marcus prepares dinner. She's arguing with her father about whether dogs should be allowed to eat ice cream, displaying the strong opinions and fierce determination that will serve her well in life. Every day with Emma is a gift that Jessica tried to steal from us, but love proved stronger than greed, and justice prevailed over cruelty. Emma's laughter filling my house reminds me that sometimes the most important victories happen around family dinner tables where children feel safe enough to take second helpings and ask for what they need. If you've listened to this story, I hope it reminds you to trust your instincts when something feels wrong in a child's life. I hope it encourages you to speak up, investigate, and never stop fighting for children who can't protect themselves. Have you ever noticed changes in a child that made you wonder if something wasn't right? Sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply pay attention and ask the difficult questions. Thank you for sharing Emma's journey with me. I hope her story gives you hope that healing is always possible and that love really can conquer even the darkest circumstances. Please take care of the children in your life and remember that sometimes a grandmother's love is the most powerful force in the world. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and share it with others who care about protecting children. Subscribe to hear more stories about families who've overcome incredible challenges, and leave a comment about how we can all do better at watching out for the vulnerable children in our communities. Until next time, remember that every child deserves to feel safe, loved, and free to eat dinner whenever they're hungry.